we're a small, friendly committee with several regular volunteers, as you can see, who lead on or support specific projects we're working on and keep members updated about meetings and any events or information that we think will interest members. And I would stress there are plenty of opportunities for more people to become active and to get involved or to join us on a committee or to do, come up with ideas. We're always very, very open to suggestions, and we actively welcome them. So, committee members have signalled their willingness to stay on, which is absolutely fantastic. So, could we please take a vote on that? All those in favour of the committee, I hope you are. Green cards, please. Is anyone against? No. Right, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Right, now I would like to introduce, I've got a huge pleasure in introducing Robin's talk. So, FeCRA's a grassroots civic voice, and it's appropriate that we have Professor Robin Hambleton here today because central to his work are strategies for progressive leadership and for sharing ideas and genuine public engagement. As a landscape architect, Kim Wilkie, member of the Commission for Building Better, Building Beauty, said at our 2017 AGM event, when plans are sprung, fully formed on a community, it destroys the sense of belonging and being a part of the continuing evolution of a place. Robin's talk will be followed by a panel discussion chaired by Jean Glasgow. I give you Robin Hambleton. Robin, welcome to Cambridge.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy, for inviting me to come today and join your discussion. Can I just say thank you to everyone for coming. There's such a lot of civic energy in the room, and I think that's really quite inspiring. So I wish you every encouragement. I'm going to give a talk tonight that might resonate, I hope it does, with some of the issues you're trying to address. I'll say ever so quickly on my background. I worked in local government. This is quite a long time ago, but I enjoyed working in different local authorities, and I know we've got some councillors and local government colleagues in the room tonight. Then I became a scholar, an academic, and worked in different universities, in different places. I've been in Bristol for most of the last 30 years. I was at the University of Bristol and then at the University of the West of England. My last job was in Chicago, where I worked for the University of Illinois at Chicago. I spent 5 years in American academia, working with cities and city change. So enough about me. I'm going to go through a presentation that's about making an inclusive city. And the image on the screen there, some of you will probably recognise that. That is the Clifton Suspension Bridge over the Avon Gorge, which is of course in Bristol. So I put it up at the beginning partly to let you signal a little bit where I'm from, but certainly when I talk to students I like to use the bridge image as a way of thinking about change and aspiration. Because when Brunel proposed to build this bridge, it was the largest bridge in the world by a long way in the 1860s. The common view was that this is impossible, it can't possibly be done. So when people come and debate with us and say the inclusive city is impossible, it can't be done, I say perhaps that was said of some other energetic leaders who wanted to change things, and the skeptics were proved wrong. So I'm not saying building an inclusive city is like building a bridge, but it's just an example of taking on a challenge and making a difference. I think I'm going to stand here now because I think I'm going to try and record the talk. It's going to be in two parts, but just firstly to kick off, I'm going to be drawing on my recent book. It's called Leading the Inclusive City, Place-Based Innovation for a Bounded Planet. I do have a copy at the front here. I've got to put some flyers on the piano if you're interested to find out more about it. In it, I spent a few years researching inspirational leadership in different cities around the world. And I think the key thing I'd say for tonight is in the book there are 17 inspirational innovation stories drawn from 14 different countries. So it's quite a global international book. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to talk about 17 inspirational stories tonight, but I'm going to draw one or two just to try and encourage a more ambitious conversation about what I call place-based leadership. I'll keep saying that phrase and later it'll become clearer what I mean. But I think that's what you are all engaged with in this room tonight. How do you shape the place where you live and work and enjoy your lives? And that requires leadership. And you are leaders, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room. So, the first part is going to be about these international experiences. And if there's time, Wendy, I'll say in the second part something about Bristol. Because I'm working quite closely with Marvin Rees, the directly elected Mayor of Bristol, where we have a one-city planning approach that's currently underway. I'm quite involved in that with councillors and a lot of civic actors. So I thought I'd say a little bit about Bristol to come back to Britain. But I want us to fasten our safety belts now and get ready to travel around. That's Portland, Oregon. It's one of the case studies in my book. That's probably the greenest city in the US. There's a debate, of course, about these claims. But if you're interested in equity planning, fair cities, I think Portland is one to consider. I'm not going to talk too much about it now, but it unites green thinking with social justice. I'm really going to give one example of inspirational leadership to kick off. It's Melbourne. Now Melbourne, this is a cutting from the local paper, it's called The Age in 1978. And a journalist did a critique of the governance of Melbourne then, saying basically it's got an empty, useless city centre. This is 1978. And put pictures in the paper to show it was true. So what had happened in Melbourne, in classic bad city planning, they created a central business district with lots of offices downtown, civic institutions, but other private sector offices, that then emptied out at night, so you had this dead centre. So why am I bringing up this example? I'm bringing it up because it's changed from being a really quite ugly place into being probably one of the most successful cities in the world. The Economist rates livable cities. You know, The Economist has got all this data about global cities. In the last 5 years in a row, I think Melbourne is #1, not in Australia or the Southern Hemisphere, in the world. So you might think, how can it be true, given it's a dump? The answer is, really, quite effective place-based leadership. I know we've got urban designers and architects and colleagues from city planning in the room. I wanted to use this one tonight because the role of city planning and urban design was critical in transforming Melbourne. So, in simple terms, it was cars out, people in. Labour councillors got control in the early 1980s, and said we're going to change the city, it's not how we want it to be. We're going to advance the cause of urban design. They appointed an urban design director who's called Rob Adams. He's actually still there. I think he's put 25 years in now as the urban design leader of Melbourne. They back him with staff. This is public funding. I think Rob's got 60 urban design staff in Melbourne. They got rid of the highway engineers in terms of power, pushed them right out the way. You were talking about the bus lanes earlier, Wendy. This is exactly what they did. They said, we're not interested in that, we're interested in a high-quality, livable place. So they transformed the city centre, had 700 homes in it, or residents rather, in 1980, to I think about 4,000 or 5,000 now, quite a lot of residential. There's 2 universities very active in contributing to these changes. Lots of small businesses, closing roads to traffic, radical improvements in public transport. So you've got there an example of successful place-based leadership. You can't have an argument and say, well, they didn't do very well. They were a dump and they're #1, according to The Economist. The reason they were successful was the power of place took on interests and actually beat back the private sector interests that wanted to dominate development in Melbourne. They would turn away development that didn't make a successful and important contribution to the public realm. I'm going to step away from examples now and give you a framework, because if I give you more and more examples, it might be entertaining and interesting, But to understand what's going on in cities, and I'm including Cambridge and the city region here, it's helpful to have some concepts about the power of place. So in this diagram, I'm not going to make this a long academic lecture, that's not appropriate, but just some concepts. I'm arguing to you that every place in the Western world, and actually wider, is shaped by 4 sets of forces. This applies to Cambridge too. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see environmental limits. Is it readable at the back, actually? Can you read the lettering more or less? 1 or 2 nods, thank you. That's encouraging. I'll say what's on the slide. At the bottom, then, we have to build sustainable cities. We know the evidence from climate change. Wendy was talking about it earlier. We cannot go on to building unsustainable cities. In that square, that's the one side that's solid, if you look at it. The other 3 sides are a bit more malleable, there's room for some movement. I'm suggesting to you that the environmental limits are not negotiable. We've got to change, otherwise we won't have a human race on the planet. The planet will be fine, by the way. I'm not worried about the planet. It's whether we are on it that matters for us, I guess. So what are these other sides of the square? Just as you can see, I sometimes put this different ways around. We've got the economic drivers that are the movements of capital and investment that shape what happens in a place. Economics of city structures matter. The economic structure of Cambridge is shifting as you watch. Powerful interests are being moved by other more powerful interests coming in. Some of these powerful interests are enormously powerful globally, not just locally. So I'm thinking of multinational companies and big businesses, and some of these interests do not care about place. They're not expected to, they're not bad people, it's just that they don't care about place, they're driven by the profit motive, and they want to exploit place for their private profit. So on the other side of the square, you see the social movements, like a lot of people in this room, who are not against good economic development, but might have some views about the kind of economic development in the city, and might have some views about the quality of life that you want in the city. So there's a conflict here, I'm simplifying, but there's economic power that has to be resisted by the power of place. At the top of the diagram, and this varies by country, and I really want to emphasise this, at the top of the diagram, there are governmental arrangements granting power or not to the local level. So we live, unfortunately, in a super centralised state. And I work internationally a lot, and there's nowhere in the democratic world anywhere like the centralised state we've got here. It's happened over 30 years, but it's holding back the quality of life in our country, and it's eroding all the possibilities, or many of the possibilities for local leadership. Other countries aren't like this, and I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. Local authorities and local people have enormous power to shape what happens in their place. So the key challenge for us as we work in our communities now is not just locally to advance social justice and economic justice, it's very important to rebalance power so the localities become more powerful. Okay, that's 1 slide, there's 2 slides on the concepts. I'm a professor of city leadership, and I often use this slide to illustrate the different voices that need to be orchestrated to make for a successful city. There are 5 in this flower diagram. Marvin Rees, the mayor of Bristol, rather likes this. He uses it quite a lot, which is an honour for me. He calls it a flower diagram. I hadn't thought of that, but it's the petals of the flower. You have a political realm. You have elected colleagues who take on that important political leadership role, enormously important. Even in our country, where their powers are reduced, they're still critical because we elect them and hold them to account. The second group of leaders are what I call the public managerial and professional leaders employed by the state and other agencies to help govern our places. So the trained city planners and all the other architects, designers, transport, all the rest, they often don't see themselves as leaders. They say, oh, but the leaders are the councillors, we are just the servants of the leaders. And I say, no, no, no. You're full-time, highly trained people, you are civic leaders. And by the way, there are 3 other groups outside the state, and in this diagram, I won't go through it in too much detail. There are business leaders who care about the place. So as we think about business interests, think about those that are placeless and don't care about the place.
and place-based who do. Lucky for us, most business in the world is still rooted in place, and the success of those businesses depends on the success of the place. So there's a very strong alliance here where we can unite with business interests in a place. The trade unions are very important, in some countries enormously important, less so in ours now, but still important. And then I guess the sector, which many of you might place yourself in, is the community sector, where you have a wide variety of different agencies and groups campaigning for social progress in the way they see fit. So that's a concept of leadership, and notice the areas of overlap. All of these leaders have a role to play. The really successful cities unite leaders from the different realms. That's what we're doing in Bristol. We call it the one city approach. If you look at the centre of the diagram, that's where the action is in Bristol, bringing all these voices together. Not easy, quite conflictual at times, but that's really where I think we need to try and go. And some cities are doing it. I'll give you, that's the same diagram, place-based agencies shaped by forces around it, but there's always space to innovate. Okay, we're off to New York now. This is a picture in Manhattan looking down the west side. In the picture there, taken in I think 1980, you can see an elevated railway threading its way through the streets. For about 80 years, this was the main freight route from the docks down at the bottom out to the US, to the prairies. So you have it, it's about 2 stories above street level, and that's the way freight moved through New York. As you know, the US invested in big highways, highway networks, so the freight moves to the roads. Big mistake, massive mistake, but they did it. So this High Line, it's called, became disused. Mayor Giuliani, I don't want to bias you against this gentleman, but he is a close advisor to Donald Trump now. As a few chuckles, I had met him when I was in Chicago. He was mayor of New York at the time of 9/11, and he actually did quite a good job in a very difficult situation. But at the same time, he signed a demolition order to get rid of this High Line. Now, that's quite a challenge. The only snag for him is the High Line goes through 2 gay neighbourhoods. And 2 gay guys thought, we don't want this wonderful historic structure to be demolished. We're going to start a campaign. This is a community-based campaign. They're not experts, these guys. They just live there. We've got to stop this. We want to save the High Line. I'm going to be very short. There's a longer lecture here, you can tell. The short story is they stopped it. They stopped the demolition, and they created arguably the most successful urban public space, certainly in the United States, and I think it compares with some European examples. How did they do it? They did it by campaigning locally. They got some quite influential artists and photographers and cool people in New York who saw the building, saw the structure as part of the history of the city. New York Times backed it and said there's something here to look at. A councillor then picked up locally, Catherine Quinn I think her name was. She said we ought to be looking at this. Critically, Giuliani's term of office came to an end. Mayor Bloomberg comes in and says, let's have a look at this. Let's just be sure this is something we want to do. They put the designers on it, the lawyers, and they transformed the High Line. This is a nice view of it, an aerial view, into a fantastic public space. This is public space, this is not private space. It's got very good elevator access at different points. It's very wheelchair friendly. It's owned by the Friends of the High Line, so the city puts on money in to help. The planners, the designers, the botanists, there's lots of community events on there. It was originally 10 blocks, now it's, I think it's 35 blocks. You can walk a long way in New York on the High Line. Even in addition, because they displaced land boundaries from underneath the land where the developers wanted to knock it down and build, they then realised they could make money by building nearby because of the asset of the High Line. So the High Line that was opposed by the developers, they were banging on Giuliani's door, get this out of the way, we want to build, build, build. Now they're glad they were wrong because they're making more money because they've got the High Line. So I give you as an example of inspirational leadership, but notice it wasn't City Hall that led this. Think of those 5 petals on the flower. City Hall was saying we're going to demolish it. It was the community activists who stood in the way and said, we're changing this agenda, and they did it. And I think that for tonight might be a key message for the activists here tonight. I know not everyone's involved directly in community action, but maybe many of you are. Think of the land values and the power of the people wanting to develop that strip of land. They got beaten by the community. So, I'm going to give you maybe one more example. I was talking to Wendy a little bit earlier today. This is Freiburg in southern Germany. It's one of the case studies in my book. Freiburg, I don't know about you, but I live in Bristol and I pay an electricity bill because I get one sent to me and I have to pay it. In Vauban, on the south side of Freiburg, some of the designs of the housing there is so good in terms of solar power and energy conservation, the residents have an income from their electricity. So they're selling spare power into the grid. You can see the little kid on the bike. This is super children-friendly development. By the way, the city's growing. It's 230,000 people now. It's expanding. It's probably the German centre for solar energy. It's very green. It has a directly elected Green mayor. If you're interested in the history, this is where the Green Party started in 1970, when a group of activists said we don't want a nuclear power station, and they campaigned and grew, and the Green Party was springing up elsewhere. But I think you can probably trace the Green Party directly to Freiburg. Now, in this example, I want to celebrate not just the councillors, but the city planners and designers, because it's very advanced design here. So when I was talking about, Wendy was telling me a bit about Cambridge planning, I know nothing about Cambridge planning, but luckily all of you do. In Freiburg, they put the trams into the place before the people. So you have a high quality tram line, and there's virtually nobody living there, because they want those people to have great access to the city without a car. They've got 300 miles of bike lanes that they've built since 1970. 300 miles in a small city. You can move around it effortlessly. Quite a wealthy city, I accept, but good news, car ownership is going down in Freiburg because it's such a well-designed place. So there's many more examples in my book, 17 altogether. I've given you 3. I just want to quickly, and give me the card if I'm running over, because I might be, I'm not sure. 1 minute, okay, she's very clear. That was a quick note to Bristol, because you might say, oh, these ideas are fine for other countries where there are much more powerful local governments. Like in Germany, Freiburg, all the local governments have sovereignty. They're in the constitution of the state. So the central state can't tell them what to do. Freiburg just says, go away. We are protected, they've got legal rights. We should have that in Britain, obviously. And by the way, they can do all kinds of financing in the way they think fit. So it's local power. That's obviously what we want in Britain. Sweden is even better, so I might answer that in questions. So in Bristol, we haven't got that fiscal power. We're like Cambridge. That is the suspension bridge at the top. I want to keep the suspension bridge in mind. You can see it in the distance. I just want to say a little bit about what's happening in Bristol. But before that, that's what's happening to local government in Britain. So this is the figures for Bristol. It'll be the same for Cambridge. I could get some nods from the Cambridge colleagues. So in 2010, we had 210 million from the central state. Next year, 45 million. We're closing libraries in Bristol. We're the 5th richest country in the world. Bristol is the 2nd most prosperous city in Britain per head after London. We're closing libraries. Now just think about that for a minute. How ludicrous. So Cambridge is probably under similar pressure. Some cities in the north it's even worse. We've got a directly elected mayor. Marvin Rees was elected in 2016. I think some of you would have heard the previous mayor, George Ferguson, who I think spoke, was it last year? George ran for election in 2016 but was defeated by Marvin, who was a Labour candidate. And Marvin's pushing not just a green agenda, but much more a social justice agenda in the city. And he's got this idea of a one-city approach. I'm going to skip through quickly because there's not time to go into a lot of detail. But the idea is that central part of the flower diagram where you bring everyone together in a common effort to advance the quality of life in the city. There's 1 or 2 pictures of Marvin out and about. Civic Drive, this is the Queen Street effort. I'm going to just go to the next slide. And you might say, well, what's it doing? I'll give you 5 quick things. We have inclusive gatherings every 6 months. One was 3 weeks ago, 200 people from all the realms of city leadership in the room discussing the One City Plan, which is a plan through to 2050. 2050, very detailed about creating a fair, just and eco-friendly city. Quite radical. It's all on the website if you want to see the detail. Just Google One City Plan in Bristol. We have project groups tackling particular issues, drawing teams together from the different realms. So it's not City Hall or the business, it's bringing them together to learn from each other how to solve problems. Because everyone's got a voice in this model. I'm going to skip to the end because I'm conscious of time. Homelessness is just one example I could talk about, where we had First Bus, that's the bus company that does the buses in Bristol, in the group tackling homelessness. You may say that's a bit odd. What are they going to do? They're committed to doing something, and they've given 2 double-decker buses that are being converted as emergency rescue accommodation for residents. That couldn't happen without a city office or One City approach. Okay, there's Marvin internationally, that's with Bill de Blasio, the Mayor of New York. There is a very interesting alliance of progressive cities developing now. It's called the Global Parliament of Mayors, and Marvin Rees is co-chair, and we hosted that parliament in Bristol in October. So as we talk about these international examples, it's great if you can get the practitioners connecting, because you can share things directly on the internet now and make a real difference. So you can find out a lot about St. Friedberg and use it. Okay, this is my closing slide. I think just 5 points that might be for debate. The power of place matters. Inclusive public leadership can be developed and can make a difference, notwithstanding the enormous power of placeless leaders that can be taken on. I've given you some examples. I think public leaders and community leaders have got to get more collaborative, and there's some good ideas in leadership theory here about how to collaborate that have been neglected. International city learning, I've already said. And of course, I'm recapping, but I want to emphasise, we need to rebalance power in our country so that localities have more power than they have at the moment. Thank you very much.